So if you're thinking of becoming a private pilot, this is a video I think you're really going to enjoy. Hey there, my name is Mike. I'm a pilot, and in this video, I want to do what might have been done on other videos, plus some extra things I'm pretty sure you probably haven't seen or heard before. So here's what we're going to cover in this video. First, what is involved in getting your private pilot's license? How long does it take? Why is now such a good time to become a pilot? And how to choose a school and an instructor. Now, there's some caveats that I'm going to cover in that section of the video. And then finally, we'll wrap up with the biggest mistakes that I see people make that cause them to take a longer time to complete flight training, which ultimately leads to spending a lot more money and experiencing high levels of frustration, which may even lead to individuals giving up along the way. And of course, that's not fun at all. So to avoid that, stick around because we're going to jump right into it. So, the private pilot's license is the starting point of your aviation journey, and it can open a world of opportunity to you. Maybe you just stop there and fly for fun and take your friends for a ride or go fishing or do whatever it is that you like to do, but know that there's a lot more opportunity waiting for you, and now is an incredibly good time to take advantage of the opportunity. So most commonly, when people get a private pilot's license, the next thing they're probably going to do is get an instrument rating. Then after that, they might get their commercial multi-engine add-on, or they might get their commercial single-engine land rating. And beyond that, some people might get their CFI, also known as a Certified Flight Instructor rating, as well as their CFII and MEI, which are other instructor ratings that you can potentially get. And I did most of my training at a Part 141 school, and prior to that, I did a lot of research about the big box schools that advertise their training to be completed in about 7.5 months. And now most of those schools have changed those times to about 12 months, which is for many reasons. One of the big issues at these schools is they have many instructors and large amounts of students all trying to schedule at the same time. And it was actually took me 12 months to complete my training, but I do believe I could have done it in 6 months if I had a dedicated instructor to focus on me all the time. But we'll talk about that a little bit later, and more details on that can be found by watching this video right here. So I want to talk to a little bit to the people who are thinking about becoming professional pilots as opposed to the pilots who are planning to fly for recreation. So know this. There's never been a better time to become a commercial pilot. And the very reason for that is that there are mass waves of existing pilots that are retiring. And so that is creating a significant pilot shortage. So that demographic shift, and combined with what happened with COVID, just caused a huge pilot shortage. And that means that the airlines are more desperate than ever to hire pilots, and they're paying pilots more than they ever have. As an example, I'm going to cover this in another video. That's the reason I decided to do a Career 2.0, and I fully expect to earn 6 figures in my first year with an airline. So if that sounds interesting to you, again, watch the video that I will link down in the description, and know that the private pilot's license is the very first step in that journey. Now let's talk a little bit about the prerequisites that you will need to be a private pilot. So you need to be 17 years of age. You need at least a 3rd class FAA medical. Now, if you're thinking about becoming a commercial pilot at some point in time, I would encourage that you get yourself a 1st class medical right from day one, because if you can't for whatever reason, then becoming a commercial pilot is simply not going to be an option for you. So that's a good thing to know, especially for you career pilots out there. I wouldn't want you to spend money and for you to find out later down the line that you won't be able to hold the rights to be a commercial pilot. And additionally, you need to be able to speak, read, and write English. And of course, I'm in the United States, so I'm talking about the FAA rules. So if you're in a different country, of course, you're going to have to do your own research to make sure that you understand the differences between what I'm explaining in this video and your particular country. And then the very first thing that I would encourage that you guys do is go out and book a discovery flight. So a discovery flight, if you've never flown before, is the whole idea that you go up for approximately an hour with a flight instructor, and you are able to fly the aircraft, see if you like aviation as a whole, and hopefully you catch the aviation bug and you ultimately choose to begin flight training because you enjoyed your discovery flight so much. So now let's talk a little bit about the timeline of becoming a pilot. So the rule of thumb is kind of all over the map. You could do it in as little as a month. A lot of people take 6 months, 3 months, 4 months. It really depends on how often you fly. That's really going to be the determining factor. Now in my case, I got mine quickly because I was flying 3 or 5 days a week, and I was super focused on that. So this is really important for you to understand, because I know that a lot of people come into this thinking they're limited by budget and or limited by their time that they have to train. So just know that you're going to spend less money the faster you go, and you'll end up actually spending more the slower you go, because in between flights, the shorter the amount of time you have between your lessons, the less likely you are to forget what you've learned. And therefore, you're not going to take 2 steps backwards. You're always going to be moving forwards, as opposed to a person who flies once or twice a week and is frequently forgetting what their instructor had taught them the last lesson, which ultimately can lead to prolonged training and spending more money that one might wish to do to complete their training. And really, you're going to forget a lot of the stuff, and you're going to have to do a lot of repetition in your training. So just know that the faster you decide to go, the faster you can get your private pilot's license, and the more proficient you're likely to be, and you'll probably end up spending less money in the long run. So now let's talk about testing, the part that no one really likes about aviation. So how you are going to be tested is based on 3 things that the FAA requires. So the FAA requires 3 different types of tests. So there's going to be a written test, then there's going to be an oral exam, and there's going to be a practical test. Now those last 2 things, the oral and practical test, are going to be at the end of your training, commonly called the check ride. The written test can be done anytime, and I recommend you to do it at the very beginning. So how do you get ready for that written test when you know absolutely nothing about aviation? And the answer to that is ground school. So there's quite a different number of ground school providers. Now some of you may not need a ground school. Some of you may be excellent studiers. I know I'm not. And the FAA produces all sorts of manuals that you can use to self-study. So the most common of the FAA manuals is what we call the PHAK, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and I have a copy right here. And this is one of a number of books that are available from the FAA, and you can get them off Amazon, and of course you can get them electronically for free if you would prefer that. This one right here is kind of the pilot's best friends. It's a bit of an encyclopedia. It's more of a reference book than something you read cover to cover, although you can. So when it comes to helping you understand what you're going to be tested on during the check ride, the FAA does not keep it a secret. They actually publish these guides, and it's called the Airman Certification Standards. It's going to be your best friend. We call it the ACS. This particular one is for the private pilots. I actually have a copy, but they make these for commercial pilot exams and instrument ratings. So I want to make sure that you really understand how important the ACS is. This is not like the PHAK where it's filled with knowledge. Instead, this is your roadmap to passing your check ride. So make sure that you understand what the ACS is, because it's going to show you in each section the things that you need to know. So you'll need to know this, this, and this. And then the next page, you'll need to know this, this, and this. And when you're getting your check ride with your FAA examiner, for every one of the section that applies to you, it's essentially fair game for them to ask you about any one of the skills in that section or any one of the pieces of knowledge in that section. So ultimately, the ACS is your best friend when it comes to getting ready for your check ride. So those of you who want to study on your own, there's absolutely no lack of information available for you to do that. And most of it's free. But just know that there are also organized ground schools that you can go through. So I'll just name a few of the ground schools that I can think of right now. So they have the Gold Seal ground schools. It has really modern graphics, so I'd recommend that. And then they have Gleam, so Gleim. I've never really figured out how to pronounce it. And then they also have King School is another, Sporties is another, and there are definitely more than that. Just know that if you're not really a type of self-study person, that there are no lack of online ground schools available for you to take. Also, if you wished, you could work directly one-on-one with a CFI, so Certified Flight Instructor, to do ground school. That would obviously be the most expensive because you're going to have to pay them whatever their hourly rate is to teach you the things that you probably could learn on a self-study basis. So now that we've talked about testing, let's talk about the minimum requirements that are going to be required by the FAA. Number 1, for a private pilot's license, you need to have 40 hours of flight time. If you're in a different country, I don't know what that is, so you have to look it up on your own. But here in the United States, it's 40 hours. And of that 40 hours, 20 hours must be with an instructor. And during those 20 hours, you must cover 3 hours of cross-country training, 3 hours of night training, 3 hours of instrument training, and then 3 hours of flight test prep as you get closer to your check ride. Then in addition to all those dual hours you will have with a flight instructor, you need to make up the difference to get 40 hours, and those can be solo hours. So ultimately, going back to what we mentioned earlier, the less you fly, you're going to get rusty. So I would encourage you to budget an extra 10 to 20 hours into your budget to become proficient enough so that you're able to pass that check ride. So now let's talk about how to choose a school or how to choose an instructor. Now, most people are attending a school because they don't own their own aircraft. However, I met a guy the other day who's like, I'm going to become a pilot. He bought a plane first, and then he went around and found an instructor to teach him in that aircraft. So let's talk about schools. First of all, there's 2 main buckets for schools. One is called Part 61, and one is what I called earlier a Part 141 school. And in this video, I'm not going to go at great length to describe the differences to you because you can easily go on the internet and look it up on Google. But what I do want you to understand is that basically a Part 141 school follows an FAA approved curriculum and generally speaking takes longer. Part 61 school, which is the type of school that I plan to work with, has a non-FAA approved curriculum. It's whatever the school decides or whatever the instructor decides what they're going to do to teach you. And so what that creates for you is it creates the opportunity to go faster if you're a quick learner. So I'm a big fan of Part 61 schools now, and I would strongly encourage that you give the Part 61 a chance. So now let's talk about the differences between, or actually 3 or 4 really important things that I think your school must have in order to be a good school for you to do your flight training at. And thing number 1 is they must have enough aircraft for the students so that you can fly often. I've talked to so many people who said, yeah, I want this school or that school for a while. And the biggest problem was I couldn't often book the aircraft often enough, and it has really slowed down training. So how do you figure this out? Hang out in their parking lot and talk to people who are coming out of the building. Ideally, they're students, and ask them, hey, how often are you flying? Are you ever finding yourself where you can't book a plane because the plane is down or there just aren't enough planes to go around? If you're hearing a lot of people saying that, you might want to give a second thought to attending that school. It's time for you to reconsider the flight school that you plan on going to. Thing number 2, airplanes require maintenance, and they require a lot of it, and especially in schools they're going to go through. Those 100-hour inspections happen on a pretty regular basis. So ideally, not mandatory, but ideally the school has its own in-house mechanics and shop, and they can do that stuff on their own, and that is going to allow them to have less downtime on the aircraft. The next best thing is they have a cozy relationship with an aircraft maintenance facility. For example, we have mechanics that are in-house and even some that travel if needed. So if maintenance is needed to be done elsewhere, it won't be an issue. Additionally, the mechanics at some schools work closely with the school to make sure that when planes do require a 100-hour inspection. They have a minimal amount of downtime. Number 3, or actually it's kind of like a 3.5, is weather. So make sure, obviously when the weather's bad, you can't fly. And in the winter, that can be much more of an issue than it is in the summertime. So just keep that in mind. You want to be training in a place that has access to simulators and hangars to keep planes ready to go even on the cold days. If you don't live in an area like that, you may want to consider doing what I call sprint training, where you would go for ideally someplace for a few months and just finish your trainings. So you live there for a while, but if that's not an option for you, maybe have a form of employment or your license test that you could go for a week and then come home for a bit and go for another week and come home for a bit, and really take advantage of that compressed amount of time to complete your training in a short period. But if that's not an option for you, then you'll just have to work with whatever you got. Now, number 3 is more important if you're looking to accumulate multiple ratings like I did. For example, in my case, I got all of my ratings at one place. I would not have been able to do that without access to DPs, or designated pilot examiners. These are the independent contractors that work with the FAA to give flight tests or the check rides that we mentioned earlier that you're going to have to do. Now, if you're only getting your private pilot's license, then it's not a big deal because you're not stacking ratings. But just know, I have heard in some cases where people are waiting 4 months for a check ride. So that means you're doing all this flying and getting proficient and being signed off for the exam, and then you've got to wait 4 months for your check ride. I haven't heard of anything much longer than that, so that's sort of like a worst case scenario, but you're going to lose all of that proficiency during the 4 months in which you're waiting for an exam, and you could potentially even waste more money just to keep your proficiency. So ideally, you're finding a school and you're talking to students at that school, and you understand that the average wait time for a check ride with a DP is shorter is better, ultimately. And then the last thing is a FAA flight simulator. Now in the private pilot's license, it's not as important, but again, if you're going on to other ratings, it's definitely becoming more critical, especially in the instrument rating and the commercial rating, because the FAA does allow you to have up to 20 hours of your time in a simulator for your instrument rating and up to 50 hours for your commercial rating. So those two overlap. So in my case, I had 20 hours during my instrument rating that I did in my simulator, plus another 30 hours in my commercial rating that I did in the simulator. And that really helped me to save a whole lot of money. Plus, simulators don't care what the weather is doing, so you can go and fly on bad weather days. If you don't have access to a simulator at a school near you and you like something else about the school and you're working on your private pilot's license, I would say, hey, go for it. That's just fine. The other thing that I would really encourage you to do is get yourself a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator, because you can learn a great deal from that simulator. It's not an FAA approved simulator. You can't log time on it, unfortunately, but you also don't have to pay an instructor to teach you in it. For example, if you're wanting to become a really proficient pilot with a Garmin G1000, it's very easy to do that in the Microsoft Flight Simulator. So now that we've talked about flight schools, let's talk about instructors. Thing number 1 that I would encourage you to ensure is that you have good communication and rapport with your instructor. Because let's face it, you're going to sit beside them in that cockpit for a long time. And if you don't really enjoy that person for whatever reason, it's really going to take the fun out of your flight training. Ideally, you want to have a really great bond with your instructor or instructors if you're using more than one, so that every hour that you're spending in the aircraft is an enjoyable hour. The other thing that I would strongly encourage you to do, and this is especially true if you are interviewing an independent flight instructor, is make sure that you understand how they're going to handle the process of your training. And I use the word process very, very purposefully, because in my case, I'm a very process-oriented individual. And so I have a written syllabus that I take my students through step by step, and I create it to align with what the FAA expects. And the reason that I did that is I wanted to make sure that I was giving my students the best experience, and that I was ensuring that I was not going to be neglectful and miss anything that they needed to be trained on. So that if you do that correctly, you know exactly where you're going to be in every flight in the aircraft, as opposed to just kind of randomly flying around today. As much as randomly flying around today sounds a bit odd, it does happen from time to time. I've talked to students who have much more hours than I would expect a student pilot to have, and I'm just asking them, well, what are these instructors doing with you? And sometimes the answer was, well, we just kind of fly around a lot, and maybe they were training on some things too often or repeating some things more than they need to be repeated. Or I'm not exactly sure what was, but just the point of this section of the video is be diligent about how you select your instructor. And make sure to understand what the teaching and training experience that they're going to give you is going to be like. And make sure that lines up with your expectations. All right, so now let's talk about the actual flying that you're going to do as part of your training. So each and every flight, you can expect there's going to be a pre-flight, then you're going to fly, then you're going to be in a post-flight debrief, and that's when your instructor is going to give you feedback on how you did in the cockpit that particular day. That's going to happen over and over and over and over again throughout your training. So the first milestone that you're looking to reach is that first solo. That is the opportunity for you to go flying with nobody else in the aircraft. That will happen at some point. In my case, I think it was after 11 hours. Most people take a little bit longer than that, but just know that's a very regimented process described by the FAA that we as instructors have to take you through to make sure that you are ready and proficient and safe for that first solo. So that's big milestone number one. But the learning definitely does not end there. In addition to the first solo, you're going to get trained on planning cross-country flights. There comes some really great tools that make it pretty easy to do, like a tool called ForeFlight, which is referred to as an electronic flight bag. The FAA is on board with you using ForeFlight. It's honestly the pilot's best friend when you get your check ride. If you can't explain the difference between true course and true heading, and you don't know what an isogonic line is, and you don't know what a magnetic heading is, and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to do well. So you need to understand kind of the old school way of how it was done on paper with plotters and so forth to make sure that you can explain that during your check ride. You're also going to be trained on things like short field and soft field takeoffs and landings. Those are different than regular takeoffs and landings. You're going to need to learn how to fly what's called under the hood. There's these things called foggles that limit your view out of the window so that you have some basic level of instrument proficiency, so that on the off chance you ever found yourself in a situation, maybe at night, when you were taking off with a pitched up attitude and you couldn't see the horizon, you need to make the necessary maneuvers to prevent an accident from occurring. You're also going to be trained to fly at night. Things are different at night. Your ground references that you would use during the day aren't there. There's some illusions that you're going to have to become comfortable with. You're going to be trained on advanced communications, talking to the air traffic controller, talking on the radio, talking on the CTAF, all that kind of stuff. You need to be a good communicator in the air, and then of course emergency procedures, because things can and do go wrong, unfortunately, and you need to know, well, if my engine quits right now, what am I going to do? And that is something that is covered in training, and there's processes for all that stuff you can expect to be trained on. And finally, you can expect to actually go fly those cross-country flights and not get lost. That's very important. So it's one thing to plan it, but it's another thing to fly it, and you need to make sure that when you leave and you're going to one airport to another, that you can actually get to those places without getting lost along the way and without running out of gas and so forth. So flying cross-country is a big part of getting your private pilot's license. I want to wrap up this video by talking about one of the biggest mistakes that people make during their private pilot training. And these mistakes are really important for you to understand, because if you make these mistakes yourself, there are a couple undesirable outcomes. Number one, It'll take you longer. Number 2, you're going to spend more money. Number 3, you're probably going to feel really frustrated. And unfortunately, sometimes that frustration leads people, combined with the other 2 that I just mentioned, to give up and never achieve their goal. And it's really sad when that happens. I remember during my training, there were multiple times that I felt very frustrated. So the biggest thing that I can, and I've talked about this a lot, but I want to recap because it's really important, is when you choose a school, make sure that you pay attention to the things that I talked to before, such as the aircraft, the availability, the weather, the dedication that the instructors have, and the availability of instructors with, a scenario with a school of too many students. And how are those aircraft being maintained, and how long are you going to have to wait for an examiner? These things are really important, as well as the frequency of your training. So how to get all your ratings in less than 6 months? Very simple. Fly every single day, unless there's bad weather like a thunderstorm or a tornado. So yeah, fly often and make sure that you have the smallest gap possible between your flights, and you will keep your proficiency high. And you will keep moving forward and progressing. That knowledge literally just compounds on itself over time, and that will help you save a whole lot of money in the process, because you won't be taking as many steps backwards. Those steps that are caused by having large gaps between your training. Flying once a week is not enough. It will take you forever. Flying twice a week is the bare minimum. Flying 3 times a week is better. Flying 4 times, 5 times a week is better yet. Now, I understand that not everybody has the budget to do that, and that's completely understandable. But just know that your overall budget will actually end up being higher the longer you take and the more flying you do. So you might say, well, I can only fly so often because I only have so much income over this period of time. So maybe what you want to do is delay the start of your training until you have some savings in place so that you can fly more often, and once you start, so that you don't actually have to spend as much money as if you were just doing it kind of piece by piece. And then finally, I think the biggest mistake, or another mistake that people make, well, there's a couple. So not understanding the ACS, not using the Airman Certification Standards as a part of getting ready for that oral exam, and then not working with an instructor that maybe you're just not super compatible with. The stories that I hear from people just having kinds of bad experiences with their own flight instructor. They had a part-time flight instructor who wasn't available very often, or they had a flight instructor that didn't seem to really be super focused on their students, and or not being very diligent on the curriculum, or whatever it is. But the point here is your flight instructor can have a profoundly positive and unfortunately a profoundly negative experience on your flight training. So make sure that you're really diligent about who you choose. You might even, want to have a discovery flight with more than one flight instructor, or if you don't do it that way, you might want to train with maybe, especially if it's a larger school, with multiple instructors. Go with more than one of the instructors, or the first instructor that you meet, and see which one you like, because that chemistry between you and your flight instructor is incredibly important, and it will make your training a whole lot more enjoyable. So now, if you want to come and train with me, I'm happy to do that, and all the information that you need can be found right here. It'll also be in the description. It's on the jetwithjoe.com website, and there will be an accelerated training page on that site, and that's where I put all that information that you need. So if you are interested in doing any accelerated training, go ahead and check that out, then fill out the new student application, and I will get in touch with you promptly after that. Or if you disagree with me about what we've been covering in this video, I would love if you would take a moment and put that down in the comments. It serves a number of purposes. Number one, the other people in the Jet with Joe community get to hear your perspective, which I think is important. So number two, the more comments and engagement there are in the video, the more the YouTube algorithm will show the video to other people, which would be a huge thank you to me for making it. It also gives you the opportunity to ask me questions and me to give you answers, because I do very actively manage all the comments that are left for my videos. So if you really enjoyed this video, I would love it if you would smash that like button. And if this is your first time watching one of my videos and you're not yet a subscriber and you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, maybe consider becoming a subscriber. I would really appreciate that. And you can just hit that little bell so that you get the notifications of future videos that are produced. So thank you very much for hanging out with me for however long this video was. I won't know until the editor is done editing it, but it's been a pleasure to have you here. I hope that this video has been helpful too, and I look forward to seeing your questions and comments right down below the video. Take care and have a great day, and we'll see you in another video.